The housing market has been pretty hot over the past couple of years. What would be your advice for people in developing communities with existing trees or are planning on planting trees?
Well, one of the biggest things that I would look for is trying to maintain the existing trees' overall health. Because it could be 5 to 7 years after construction to where we'll see, tree mortality from construction activities. And people don't realize that until they call us when the tree's already mostly dead or declining. So the sooner they call us to get on a fertilizer program or just to have us out and evaluate the property, we'll be better off in the long run, and we can maintain the trees as much easier than to try and save them when they're already sick.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the best approach is to be proactive with it rather than reactive. I think a lot of people don't realize that these trees have a different lifespan than we do. So whenever it comes to construction or stress factors, it could be years before they see, the effects of that specific stress factor. And by that time, once we start seeing the symptoms, it's usually too late, especially on certain trees that we have here in the Metroplex.
Yeah, there's, the typical call on my post oak doesn't look so good. And the first thing that we do is we ask, well, how new is the property, or how new is the driveway or the swimming pool? And it's almost always 5 to 7 years with the struggling tree. And then by then it's too late. Whereas if they would have called us even before construction, we could have helped with a plan to stay away from the tree or started treatments even before any stress on it. And then we have better luck keeping them healthy.
Yeah.
Keeping them healthy is always better than trying to save them later.
Yep. It's I think you'd probably agree that, whenever we're trying to save them, typically it's not very successful.
Yeah. It takes a lot of resources with, we can never guarantee results because we can't control it and the tree can't tell us exactly what's wrong. But when we're trying to save them after the fact, we use the kitchen sink approach where we throw a lot of resources at it. Whereas if we start on the front end, we don't need quite as many resources because the tree's not already stressed.
Yeah, so at that point, it's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper, and we feel a lot more comfortable saying that we can, hopefully be successful with that tree.
Right, much higher chances of success at keeping it happy and healthy than trying to stop the decline and turn it back the other way.
Or minimizing the stress on it.
Right.
Yeah.
The best thing would be pre-construction to where we can tell them how to stay away from it properly. Hopefully to accomplish the construction goals, but at least we can answer the tree questions prior to the disturbance.
Mm-hmm. Well, what would be a step-by-step plan you would put into place to help ensure, trying to minimize the amount of stress on an existing tree in a developing neighborhood?
Well, the first thing would be to judge the overall tree size versus the lot size and the project size. Because that, a huge tree on a little lot, if they're going to try and put a big house under that, it's really hard to minimize the impacts to accomplish the construction goal because nobody's going to want to hear, well, you can't build here. That's just not going to work. So they're going to do some disturbance or stress to that tree. But getting us involved early, we could help minimize or maybe shift the plan one way or the other. Like, for example, I had one customer that called me out. They were putting in a pool in a very rectangle backyard. And they had a post oak outside the fence that wasn't theirs, but they were getting to enjoy it for free. It was probably a 24-inch post oak, but they were digging this pool right under this particular tree. And I called the customer and I said, well, I really don't think we should put the pool there. I said, in your particular case, if you just could flip that pool 180 degrees and go the other way, you would only impact 15-25% of the root zone of this nice tree versus 50 to 70%. And when I went back the next time, sure enough, they were able to get a hold of the designer and flip that pool 180 the other way and didn't have to change anything about the project. That was like the coolest story that I've had. Most of the time it's, well, we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, especially for a post oak. I mean, a little bit of a difference can make a huge difference when it comes to where you're putting or where the construction is going. And that's probably the tree that we'll hear the most about when it comes to construction and trying to preserve trees is post oak, because it's one of the most sensitive.
It's definitely one of the most sensitive. I joke that you can whisper root disturbance and the thing will go into construction stress.
Yep. Kick it in its shin and then it just dies.
Yeah.
I agree. Being proactive, having us out there before anything happens, whether it's a sidewalk. I don't care if you're doing a little bit of digging or putting in sprinklers, right? If we're there before the fact, then we can do exactly what you just did and say, look, you want this tree to have the best chance possible. Because even then, moving the pool isn't going to alleviate all the stress, but it's going to mitigate a lot of it,
Right.
And so just having us out there beforehand is the best way to go about trying to be as successful as we can.
My approach with that pool was, instead of cutting every root on half of the tree, we were able to cut just a little wedge out of the root zone. So like I said, it went from a 50 to 60% impact to 10 to 15% impact. So I feel really good about, and then we were able to do some treatments also. Even though it wasn't their tree, they had access to it, and it was in like a native area. So we did some growth regulator and some feeding on it prior.
Which would be another step that you could take, if you were on a property beforehand. You could start treating proactively, like you mentioned earlier, where, we may just have to do some simple soil applications and maybe some air spade work, as opposed to having to go in there and use every tool in our toolbox,
Right.
which, ends up being a lot more costly and a lot more difficult and a lot less likely to work.
Yeah.
So
a lot of those things that end up killing, especially the native trees, they're more opportunistic pests and problems. Well, then the opportunity comes up from the construction stress. So we can use the simple tools, just fertilization or just physical barriers to keep people and things away. And then that doesn't give the opportunity for the bad things to come in, and everybody's happier. We're happier because we're not fighting this tree. The customer's happier because the tree has a better chance of success without, having to put a ton of inputs into it after the fact.
Yeah, no, we definitely want to be successful with what we're whenever we go out there and look at the trees, But so, yeah, the main cause that I found, we have a primary stress factor like the construction damage, and then we get all these, opportunistic or secondary invaders that come in after the fact. And they're not what killed the tree. You'll hear a lot of, people who talk to somebody, who wasn't a certified arborist or maybe wasn't as knowledgeable in plant healthcare say, oh, well, wood borers killed my tree. And, I have to tell them, well, not necessarily, something caused your tree to go into decline, and then the wood borers saw an opportunity to
Right.
feed on the tree, and so it wasn't really the wood borers; they're more of a symptom.
I refer to the wood borers and some of the fungal pathogens as kind of the final nail in the coffin. That, yes, that's technically what killed the tree, but that's not the whole story. That was just the final stressor that finished it off.
Yep, 100%. And then
And the sooner we can keep it from going down that road, the healthier it is, and the less inputs. Because when we're talking about opportunistic, we have to treat for insects, fungal. There's a lot of other opportunities. Whereas if the tree stays healthy, then we just keep it healthy, and there's way less inputs required.
yeah. Now, I think that one of the next steps that you could, talk about is just proper cultural practices. If there was irrigation there before, or there wasn't irrigation there before, and you're planning on putting, in irrigation, that's a super huge stress factor on a tree that's never been consistently watered like that,
Right.
In its lifespan. It could be 100 years old, and it never had sprinklers, and now it does. So,
And then we overlove it, as I
Yeah.
tell my customers. We think, well, it's so hot here. Let's water, and
Yeah.
they water too frequently, not realizing that tree's been there for 100 years and only getting water when it rains, and it looks just fine. And then we overlove it because we want that lush green grass.
So you would agree that overwatering is probably one of the biggest stress factors, along with construction damage after communities there. And,
Absolutely. Yeah, especially when you're talking about a native tree stand that is getting altered for a development, whether it be a multifamily or, a large residential, that irrigation frequency and overdoing it is definitely one of the contributing factors, one of the largest. And it's also one of the hardest for us to fix because we only see it as a snapshot on that day we're there. We can't answer, well, what does it look like 3 days from now? Because when we're talking about the saturated soil, is it 1 day, 2 day, 5 days? We don't know because we only see it that day. So it takes some repeat visits and some history building on each property, which is just really hard to do. Mm-hmm. So following some simple guidelines, deep but infrequent watering is definitely the mindset that we always try and push, without getting into the specifics of what that means, because each property is different, and two neighbors could even be different on what is deep but infrequent. Because if it's saturated soil, it's saturated soil. Mm-hmm. I don't care if it's 3 days or 5 days later, especially now after the rains.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any final thoughts, or how can customers get in contact with you or Tree Newal to?
So, when thinking about construction, the final thought would be get your certified arborist involved as soon as possible, because the sooner we're on site, the more of a plan we can get, and we can keep the trees healthier rather than try and fix them later. And for any other information or to reach out to one of our certified arborists, go to treenewal.com.